Hi, my name is William Mays, and I'm a DUI defense attorney here in the state of Michigan at 27 years, technically speaking. I've got a lot of involvement with breath testing over the years. I own a couple of Datamasters, preliminary breath testing devices, etc. I've been qualified by several Michigan courts in Datamaster testing. I was factory trained by National Patent Analytics Systems many years ago, probably 2006 or 7. I took factory training at National Patent Analytics Systems down in Mansfield, Ohio, under its president, John Fusco. So I've had a long involvement in breath testing in the state of Michigan. And I figured today I would talk about the new breath test that's out, the Intoxilyzer 9000, and to inform Michigan citizenry what they're expecting to see with this new breath testing device, the latest, greatest breath testing device on the planet, of course. So let me talk first history, okay? The back Datamaster was a fine machine created in Mansfield, Ohio by National Patent Analytics Systems. John Fusco, the owner, president of National Patent Analytics Systems, had an open door policy. That's how I was able to obtain my training. If you had questions about breath testing, you could call John up on the phone. When you took his seminar, you paid a couple of bucks, he took you out to dinner. The price of the seminar was probably the price of the dinner. We'd had drinks, we had a good time. It was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity, and John was a spectacular man. I miss him to this day. I miss him. They sold the company in March of 2013 to Intoximeters. You see, there's a lot of companies out there that compete in the breath test market because it's big money. If you can sell your gizmo to a state, I mean, state contracts are lucrative contracts, right? Intoximeters picked it up on March 14th, 2013. And I know this day because it's written down, of course, and I had to refresh my memory before I started this video. But on that day, I was testifying as an expert witness on an OWI case in the Southfield District Court, 46th District Court, that qualified me as an expert in breath testing for an attorney and his client that they were trying to contest a 0.17 breath test result where the prosecutors had charged operating with a high BAC. My expert testimony in that case was that a 17 might actually be significantly lower than a 17, and that there's a margin of error built into the numbers there, etc. Marv Geyer, the former 120-day breath test inspector, a class 4 certified officer, he was actually retired Michigan State Police, worked for National Patent Analytics Systems as a subcontractor, running around the state of Michigan, doing wet bath simulators to ensure the accuracy and reliability of breath tests across, well, he handled most of southern Michigan, southeastern Michigan. The administrative rules demand and dictate that officers perform these 120-day certifications under those rules by checking the accuracy of the instrument. Weekly simulators were done by officers at the local police departments. Every calendar week, quote unquote, a simulator test was run, but then Marv Geyer would come through and run several additional checks on behalf of National Patent Analytics Systems to ensure the 120-day certification was done properly. He testified as an expert. He was always qualified as an expert. I don't really know if Marv was ever truly an expert. He would testify that he didn't actually know how the machine worked. But we'll get to that in just a second. The third expert witness that testified on that day was Sergeant Perry Curtis of the Michigan State Police. Now, Sergeant Perry Curtis is now long retired. Sergeant Perry Curtis was in charge of Michigan's breath testing unit up at the Michigan State Police. So if there was a person in charge of breath testing across the state of Michigan, at that time, it was Sergeant Perry Curtis. Sergeant Perry Curtis knew less than Marv Geyer when it came to how a breath machine works. All that he was really responsible for was record keeping at that time and communications with National Patent Analytics Systems. So all three of us, though, were qualified as experts to testify in the Southfield case. And at that time, we were no longer using the back Datamaster. Instead, we had switched over from the back Datamaster to the Datamaster DMT. The DMT had several functions that were just wonderful functions. Graphing software that would show what a person's breath flow rate was and compare it to a printed out alcohol graph. Now, if you're a Michigan police officer, you're going to say, Mays, you're lying. No, I'm not. That stupid green button that appears on your Datamaster DMT that you use to determine whether or not a person had blown a long enough officer, that was added on to Michigan Datamaster DMT specifically because Sergeant Perry Curtis mandated it. They actually made these changes to the Datamaster to hide evidence from defense attorneys. What a terrible thing to do. Anyway, well, let me back up just a second here. While all this is going on, the whole point, the whole name to the Datamaster was that it collected data. That's how it got its name, was Datamaster. And I had constantly asked Sergeant Perry Curtis what data is available. And according to Sergeant Perry Curtis, throughout all of his tenure as the person in charge of the Michigan State Police breath testing unit, he claimed that data was automatically purged from the machine every time that a subject blew. And that was what he would testify to in court. Well. On that day that all three of us were testifying in Southfield District Court, I stepped out into the hall and called John Fusco. And I said, John, I know you want a lot of money for this Datamaster DMT, but I've got to pay for it. I've got to purchase one from you. You know I own 2 back Datamasters. I need to get the Datamaster DMT because that's what we're using here in the state of Michigan now. And John said in a hushed voice, he said, William, I'm so sorry. I can't sell you a Datamaster DMT. Why not, John? We sold the company just an hour ago to Intoximeters. As Marv Geyer, who was employed by National Patent Analytics Systems, and Sergeant Perry Curtis, who's in charge of having these Datamasters throughout the state, walked out of the court, I said, you guys aren't going to believe this. And I told them the story. And immediately, Sergeant Perry Curtis runs down to one end of the hall to make a cell phone call, and Marv Geyer walks the other way, also making a cell phone call. Both of them in pure panic. Apparently, they had no idea that this was happening. And the Datamaster DMT was transferred to Intoximeters. That was in 2013. Now, fast forward to 2000, and I believe 19, Sergeant Perry Curtis retires, and Mark Fondren from the state of Texas is brought in because he has advanced education in breath testing. He's been qualified as an expert down there, and he's known as sort of a ruthless fella when it comes to court process and procedure. Basically, in my opinion, he's a bagman for the prosecution, but that maybe is a little too harsh. He was brought in because Sergeant Perry Curtis, and this is a quote, told me that the Datamaster breath testing unit program was being held together with rubber bands. And in all honesty, they did need to bring in somebody like Fondren to square things away. So that's why Mark Fondren was brought in from Texas to lead up a new division that's going to be in charge of breath testing at that point. Oh, woe is Mark Fondren. Less than a year later, the Datamaster scandal occurs. January of 2020. Now, let me back up there. In the fall of 2019, attorney Josh Blanchard, who's from the Grand Rapids area, Josh Blanchard reported that he had found a Datamaster where the 120-day certifications were fabricated. And he called it what it is. He said, this is perjury. Oh, they all scoffed at Mr. Blanchard. That's not perjury. That's just an oversight. That's just a mistake. And Mr. Blanchard and I are good friends. We run a criminal defense attorney listserv, Darrow. And Mr. Blanchard reported that to all of our members, hundreds of them, that, hey, if you've got a Datamaster in this jurisdiction, there's a problem. Anyway, that problem was completely overlooked by the courts and the prosecution and the police departments. When defense attorneys make these arguments, when we say that there's a test that's been fabricated, when we accuse a laboratory technician of dry labbing, which has occurred, I think maybe the court should take it a little bit more seriously, because in January of 2020, all of a sudden the Datamaster scandal broke, and it dated back to August. In January of 2020, the Michigan State Police announced that there was a problem with breath testing. Let me get the exact wording for you here. This letter is to notify you that a stop order on current vendor's contract was issued January 7, 2020, due to performance-related issues. And then on January 13, 2020, the Michigan State Police removed all 203 Datamasters out of service. We didn't have breath testing in the state of Michigan for a lengthy period of time because there was fraud being committed by two of the subcontractors, those folks that had replaced Marv Geyer after he had retired. They were running around the state, fabricating test results, not doing the tests on time, entering logs, claiming that they had done tests that they hadn't done. And worst of all, they had been sharing their passwords because these Datamasters are basically mini computers. They were sharing their passwords with police officers at the local jurisdictions so that those police officers could make little corrections when there was a problem. So I didn't have to make the drive. Now, both of these people were criminally charged, and they were charged with some serious offenses and went and actually did some jail or prison time. One of them has subsequently passed away. They were both fired, of course, as a result of this. And the scandal continues to this day. For one thing, after we got the breath tests back into service, that cloud hung over the head of the Datamaster DMT. Now, let me say this. The Datamaster DMT did everything that it was supposed to do, and John Fusco stood by it. But he cautioned people, and you can look this up, John Fusco, John Fusco. Google his name, and you will find a New York Times article, where Mr. Fusco, president of National Patent Analytics Systems, was quoted in this article that says, these machines might falsely convict you of drunk driving. And John Fusco said, these machines are being used for something that they were never intended to be used for. He said a breath test should only be one piece of evidence. They are not indicative of guilt. The jurors need to look at everything else, and the reason and things that the government, the prosecution, is setting these breath tests for as prima facie evidence of guilt is absolutely wrong. That is a manufacturer of a breath test device who doesn't believe that his machine should have been used as the end-all, be-all. Again, I told you I had a lot of respect for Mr. Fusco. In any event, this scandal has hung over the head of Mark Fondren, who was in charge of the breath testing program when it occurred. And I knew at that time that the data that I had accused Sergeant Perry Curtis of being in possession of that whole time, they were either going to have to produce it to convict those guys, or they're going to have to say, we don't know where this data is. We can't convict these two people because, well, the data is purged with every single breath test that's done. And that was a lie. Yes, indeed. There is XML data that's contained and stored in a Datamaster DMT, and it is stored indefinitely. And as a result of that, in every Datamaster case that I've picked up, since the machines went back into service after the scandal was kind of bandaged and corrected, I have requested XML data in each and every single breath testing case employing the Datamaster DMT. Now, these XML data files are tiny little computer files, but it is generated every time a person blows into it, every time a simulator test is run, every time that they run a 120-day certification, every time that there's an error with the breath test. And what I found was some of these XML data spreadsheets, because I was able to take them and put them, well, first I had to manipulate the data to get them all into one big file using some of my computer knowledge, right? Get them all into one big file and then put them into an Excel spreadsheet, and it would produce these beautiful spreadsheets that would show you if there was a pattern of errors. And it was tremendously helpful for my clients in jurisdictions where there were problems. And the Michigan State Police knew that these problems were there because they had access to this data the whole damn time. They didn't care. And that's the problem with DUIs, is that the government tries to hide things, the courts try to excuse it, the prosecutors argue it goes to the weight and scoff when they're presented with evidence that their scientific forensic evidence is unsound and unreliable. This is what goes on in DUI cases. So this scandal's been hanging over Mark Fondren's head, and it kind of culminated a few months ago in the course of a jury trial. Mr. Fondren was supposed to come in and testify to XML data in a jury trial in the 33rd District Court. I was the defense counsel. The local prosecutor, good guy, nothing against the prosecutor at all, good guy. But we got the XML data, but the prosecutor objected to it coming into evidence because there was no witness there to say, hey, this is the XML data, and that's a fair argument. So I said, do you really need me to bring in Mark Fondren? And he forced me to call Mark Fondren as my own witness. And I told the judge and I told the jurors, I don't plow with another man's mule. All right, that's just a bad business practice. I know what's going to happen when I call the fellow that's in charge of the Michigan breath testing thing and try to call him as a defense witness. He's not going to be a defense witness. But so everybody knew what was going to happen. They knew what Mark Fondren was going to do. Mark Fondren comes into court. He talks to the prosecution for an hour. He testified via Zoom. And I presented him with all these reams of XML data and had a lot of questions for him. And Mr. Fondren sat up on the stand over that Zoom screen and he said, I don't know, Mr. Mays. I don't know the answers to that question either. I don't know the answer to that question. Oh, he didn't know anything. He wasn't even sure if he could authenticate the XML data that he had given to me himself. And then the prosecution started asking questions. All of a sudden, Mr. Fondren knew everything about the XML data. And I swear to God, I don't ever lose my temper in court, but that day I did. I'm pointing up at the camera so that Mr. Fondren can see me, and I'm saying, objection, objection, that is perjury, that is a lie, that is a lie. One of the jurors actually looked at me because the testimony that Mr. Fondren was giving us was so incredible. It was insane. And a juror looked at me like this. So anyways, Mr. Fondren was excused. Now, no one brought any perjury charges against him, but that left a real bad taste in my mouth. And, it's my opinion that he was an awful shifty character, and I can't wait till the next time that I get him up on the stand, Mr. Fondren. Setting that aside, the very next day, we got a great offer from the prosecution, and my client pled to a non-DUI. That's how bad that testimony was. Again, thanks, Mr. Fondren. Appreciate it. Anyway, so this scandal has been hanging over Mr. Fondren's head. It's acted as a cloud to the Michigan State Police and the entire breath testing program. Mike Nichols, an attorney out of Lansing, he said it best. He said, I'm setting every case for a jury trial when there's a Datamaster, plain and simple. Why, Mike? Because jurors no longer believe that piece of garbage works. And he's right. I mean, how can you possibly overcome the scandal that occurred in that instance? And the answer is it's hard. So Mr. Fondren came up with a great idea. He figured that you and I, as taxpayers in the state of Michigan, should spend a god-awful fortune to replace it with what he characterizes as a new device, the Intoxilyzer 9000. And perhaps it's a good time to pause this video because it's getting a little bit too long. I'll continue with the Intoxilyzer in a part 2. Thanks for listening.